For more analysis, let's speak with Victor Gao, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization. Well, thanks very much, Victor, for joining us today. We hear from President Xi, there's a lot of emphasis on this global South, right? How they should be taking the lead on the world stage. How does that, together with peaceful coexistence, align with China's growing economic and military presence on the world stage?
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence have always been the cornerstone of China's foreign policy, and China has been promoting and advocating these 5 principles of peaceful coexistence for all these decades. And fortunately, these 5 principles have been generally accepted. However, in the world of today, it is true that there are countries which still use this jingoism, and they shoot from their hip. They want to resolve problems through force rather than by abiding by peace. That means China needs to raise its voice and make its position better known in the world, so that not only China will stick to the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, but more and more countries will do the same thing. And this will make the world we live in a better world. Now, compared with the time when the 5 principles were initially proposed and today, China has been completely transformed. China is a major country in the world today, a force standing for peace and stability. That means China needs to engage with all the countries in the world to advocate this principle of peaceful coexistence. As a matter of fact, promoting trade and economic relations and people-to-people exchanges is very much a part of this peaceful coexistence between and among nations. China will continue to do so in the coming years and the coming decades in order to make the world we live in a better world.
The Chinese approach to resolve these global hotspot issues, and we know that there are quite a myriad of such issues. So how does this differ from Western approaches?
Well, when we look at the world of today, it is very obvious there are certain Western countries which use war as their first choice, for example, and they never hesitate to bring war or conflict or confrontation to the forefront in order to solve the problem for their own maximum benefit, to the disregard of the fundamental interests of the other countries. If you count on how many wars that have been broken out since the beginning of the 1950s, for example, then you will see there are countries which actually indulge in waging war against other countries to solve their own problems. Now, China is just the opposite. China, ever since 1949, has never taken the initiative to launch a war against any other country. China has been involved in some border clashes, but the border clashes were not initiated by China to start with. That means China always wants to promote peace, embrace peace, and war should be used as a last resort rather than a first preference, for example. This will really tell the world the unique position that China has been following by promoting peace, stability, and development. And China also believes that if there are problems, the better way to solve the problems between and among nations is to focus on economic development, to improve the living standards of the people involved, so that we will be in a better position to deal with the root causes of extremism, radicalization, war, conflict, turbulence, for example. That means China will need to make its position better known to the rest of the world through the United Nations framework, for example, through the BRI framework, and hopefully more and more countries will listen to the wise words from China, including Chinese President Xi Jinping, and we will move in the same direction of promoting and embracing peace rather than agitating for war.
So, Victor, help us understand this. How exactly does President Xi's call for peaceful coexistence? He talked about a community with a shared future. How does all of that square with the fact that China has been having all these confrontations with the Philippines in the South China Sea and also Japan in the East China Sea?
Well, indeed, there are some territorial disputes involving China and some of its neighboring countries. That is true. However, we need to really be responsible for history. For example, between China and the Philippines, the border of the Philippines were well demarcated by the Spanish-American Treaty of 1898 to start with, and the unconditional surrender document of Japan in 1945. Whatever that belonged to the Philippines was taken back by the United States in 1898 from Spain and again from Japan in 1945. So I think we need to really go back to the root causes of all these confrontations, and China believes it stands very firmly on the side of truth, reason, and historical responsibility. It doesn't mean that Philippines has any legitimate claim against these territorial possessions of China. And if there are problems, China and the Philippines should really engage with each other, sit down at the table, talk with each other through peace and dialogue to resolve these problems, rather than for the Philippines to invite the United States into the equation. After all, the United States is not a party to these disputes, and it does not have a case against China as far as these territorial disputes are concerned. For Japan, it is well recorded. Japan, back in 1945, surrendered not only to the United States, but to China. That's the historical fact. And it's all well recorded and carved in stone in the unconditional surrender instrument that Japan presented to China and other countries. So we do not need to go into further antiquity. We just need to go to 1945 to see what exactly was the international order established on the ashes of the Second World War. China is a defender of peace and stability rather than a troublemaker, for example. And when there are problems between China and the Philippines, China wants to engage with the Philippines to solve these problems, but China will never yield a single inch if, for example, the Philippines want to bring in other countries into these disputes, because it does not help, it's not constructive, and eventually it will not serve the fundamental interests of the people in the Philippines.
All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this discussion, but thanks for all the historical references. Victor Gao in Beijing, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization.